Here's a sentence no one's ever said. Let's go to Milton Keynes, because that is where Will Osprey versus Rey Mysterio took place. It's 2017. I've only been with WhatCulture for a couple of months, and I was lucky enough to be asked to help out, doing interviews and just doing everything involved in the Pro Wrestling World Cup, which had you look back now, a ridiculous amount of talent, and yeah, bringing up wrestlers that no one's ever heard of before, like Will Osprey, just showcasing them to people, along with I'm not going to do that, yeah, we were lucky enough to have Ricochet obviously back then, Jay Lethal was involved, Zack Sabre Jr., they had a great match on this show as well actually, and Rey Mysterio, and Rey Mysterio, I went into when we announced that we got him, I thought, well, that's going to be an amazing interview to be able to do, and it'll be nice to just sort of, you know, see what the sort of twilight of his career looks like. And then he came in and he looked awesome, and obviously now he's even still going 7 years later in WWE. And this was just sort of emblematic of the fact that he more than still had it. It is just incredible. I think Meltzer maybe even went 4.5 stars on this, back when, you know, 4.5 stars actually meant something. So I'm not really going to say much about the match because it's available on YouTube on Defiant, formerly WCPW of course. It's about half an hour all in. It is just jaw-dropping, and full disclosure, as I mentioned, I was brought in to, you know, work the WCPW World Cup and do backstage interviews or in help production or whatever it may be. Everyone stopped what they were doing for this match, unless they were, you know, filming it. Everyone just sort of went, yeah, we've got loads of stuff we need to still do for this crazy show that we've got. But it's Osprey versus Mysterio. It's Morpheus versus Neo almost. It was just amazing. Go and watch it on YouTube right now. The best UK wrestling match I've ever seen.
Is there anything even left to say, not least by me, about the match that sits over my shoulder right now? CM Punk versus Samoa Joe, the opener of All in Wembley 2023. A classic night if you're a fan of the Punker, for more than just went on in front of the cameras, but it was a night where 2 stars went out there and got 3.5. It was an experience of the likes of which I thought I would never truly feel. Wembley, of course, holy ground in the UK anyway, but in terms of pro wrestling, felt like it would be SummerSlam 92 forever and ever. WWE had seemingly never sort of even whispered about the prospect of going back. Funny how that's changed now. And AEW, as excited as we were for the ambition they would show about coming to the UK, we never dreamed they would go big and they would go to break the record. And there I was in attendance, part of the biggest paid attendance maybe in wrestling forever, who knows, to see a man that basically divided that attendance right in half. The cult of personality, CM Punk himself, was in full effect. He'd only just returned to AEW that summer, of course, and half of the fans did not want him to be there. And by the end of the night, he would join them. So it was nice to experience such an instant classic between Joe and Punk, old rivals, having what stood realistically to be probably their last ever match, but to do so on a night that suddenly had so much more history attached to it after the fact. It was something you felt like you knew you were living through a bit of pro wrestling history. 2 craft masters that just beautifully manipulated the crowd. Samoa Joe giving it that to an enormous pop, to CM Punk giving it that to enormous heat. They were just working through the greatest hits, only to save the greatest hit for last. CM Punk winning with the Pepsi plunge on Samoa Joe in the glistening white against the London sunshine. It was ultimately 3.5 star perfection. I don't know if there was a better match on that card. I wonder to this day if CM Punk will ever have a match as iconic, even in his return to WWE. And if there was ever a way to leave a company that didn't want you to do that didn't really want you to be there by the end, CM Punk, who else, absolutely nailed it. There are classics, there are moments, there are greats, but there are very few that combine all 3. Those 2 did it.
So I might be slightly biased with this one, but obviously did a lot of work with WCPW and Defiant, and we had a lot of amazing talent come through that, and a lot of amazing matches, and I'm gonna pick one of those, and it's gonna be Will Osprey versus Drew McIntyre. So this was like just in the sort of, just as Drew had like left WWE and just starting that hot run, he'd done the like big promo in ICW and kind of announced himself onto the independent scene and had started to do the run through WCPW as well, and he'd been absolutely brilliant. And then you get Osprey at the peak of his sort of indie powers, of just going out there and having bonkers matches with absolutely everybody that he can possibly have bonkers matches with. And you put them both together and they just had the most perfect chemistry that you could possibly imagine. You had Osprey obviously speeding things up, doing absolutely nuts dives, like diving over the corner of the ring into the crowd, like past the guardrail thing and like into the crowd doing flips while Drew's like sat on a chair on the outside, like just nutso moves. And then you have Drew McIntyre just slapping the absolute piss out of him. And the perfect little chemistry just became evident throughout the entire match. And it was like, I was there, I was at ringside filming it on camera, which also might make it a little bit more biased towards this, because it was just like having Will Ospreay jump over your head is like a pretty impressive sight. But yeah, just the two of them, they went out there, they knew that they were going to put on something special. Like you could see it in their sort of build-up when they were sort of first facing off in the middle of the ring, and they just both, the only goal they had was to put on the absolute best wrestling match they could, and they both absolutely smashed it out of the park. The differing styles worked absolutely beautifully together, and it just built to this sort of perfect crescendo and just escalation and escalation and escalation and violence and violence and violence and violence on top of it. And they just worked so well together, and it was a beautiful sight to behold, and you should all go and watch it and everything else on WCPW and Defiant as well.
So look, I've gone a bit safe with this one for like the best UK wrestling match that I've ever seen, because I've gone for the only, well, I think it was the first ever 5-star Meltzer rated match that I'd ever seen in the flesh, and I'm going to go for Gunter versus Sheamus at Clash at the Castle 2022, obviously in Wales, the place where my father was born. Wales, Cardiff, lovely place, and we're in the Principality Stadium. It was this big stadium setting, and the match was, it felt like I was in the middle of the Colosseum. It was like two gladiators going to war, just beating the hell out of each other. Some of those chops, honestly, there were moments in that match where I heard sounds from way up in the stands. Like I was miles away. I was absolutely miles away in this particular event, and I could hear every chop, every clothesline, every boot, every beat of the bodrum, whatever it is. I could hear all of them. I could hear everything. And just seeing Sheamus like chase Gunter around the stadium, just whacking him, doing those beats of the bodrum was brilliant. It popped me so much. But the actual brutality of the match is something that I'd never seen in the flesh before, and seeing flesh ripped to shreds by humans' hands was absolutely mind-blowing, really, and I just couldn't get enough of this match. I was engrossed. I was so caught up in it. The two of them just had the entire audience, the entire stadium in the palm of their hands, right up to that closing stretch where Sheamus goes to do the bro kick, and he gags, his body's battered, his lower back's just been completely pulverized in the match, and he goes to do it, and then he just gets obliterated by Gunter, and he hits him with a clothesline for the finish. And like, I've seen a few clotheslines win matches over the years, but nothing like that. That was like, oh yeah, that will kill him, man. Yeah, he's done, he's finished. And it was just so well done, and it really established Gunter as this person who one day would go on to be a world champion. You know what I mean? You believed it. You watched him and you thought he's gonna. This was relatively early in the run, don't forget, in the IC title run. Like, when was it? Like August, September time, maybe 2022. So it was relatively early on, but you could see here that he was just gonna, his final form as this big world championship guy, this monster, it was coming. It was definitely coming. I believed it, and I was so, just so enamored and just caught up in this chaos, this war, this battle between two absolute gladiators. It is my favorite ever UK match. I'm sticking with it.
So I've chosen Walter versus Timothy Thatcher from Progress Wrestling, chapter 60 something. Good few years ago now. I've chosen this match for two reasons. Number one, it is legitimately my favourite UK wrestling match of all time. Stylistically, it is a forearm to the skull, and I like forearms to the skull. If you do that to me in public, I will call the police. But number two, I also really like what it represents. This is the heyday for me of the British indie scene, right? The kind of 2017, 18, 19, kind of before NXT UK got its fangs into everything and started picking things apart, and everyone gets signed, which is obviously great for the wrestlers. Like, I'm glad that so many people have earned big WWE and AEW deals and broken out in Japan. Guys like Chris Brooks killing it in DDT, that's awesome. But this to me was the absolute heyday. Progress in particular spoke to me in a number of different ways. Because yes, I know marketing something as punk rock is very, very cynical, right? Brewdog, it's a marketing ploy at the end of the day. But it had that grimy aesthetic. When you looked through into the venue and it was kind of dingy and poorly lit, but the cameras were right up in the wrestler's face, and a lot of it is shot from the floor with someone on a little handheld looking in, and they're getting right into the nitty-gritty of the whole things. It felt tight, it felt dirty, it felt gritty, it felt almost like an illegal fight club in a lot of ways. But Progress always had this awesome story-driven approach to their pro wrestling as well, and I know story's kind of a cursed word these days. But this is two friends, ostensibly. Timothy Thatcher and Walter, they were in Ring Camp together for years and years and years and years. WXW, they did a few bits and pieces here and there when they were in WWE together. Thatcher obviously wasn't in WWE for long. But what I mean when I say I like what this represents is that quite recently, Gunter, as he's now known, of course, had a really interesting comment to Sports Illustrated where he was speaking about Tim Thatcher. And he said, he's one of the wrestlers I've learned the most from. The thing about Tim is that he won't compromise his style. He's this gritty, nasty, old school style technician. He's never going to change who he is, and that's why he's never going to make it as like a mainstream blockbuster star. Because that's who he is. And you can obviously look at Gunter, who was that, but he's made some compromises, and now he's the most awesome thing in WWE. He's a good example of a wrestler who was really badass and really unique, and who did, tweak a few things when he got to the biggest promotion in the world, but didn't completely sell himself out, and he's found success. But the reason I like that Thatcher quote so much is because we live in this stupid era where a lot of people will tell you if it's not the biggest thing in the world, it sucks. There's wrestling fans, a match graphic will appear for a show and someone will go, what's that going to draw? Why is Tomohiro Ishii wrestling Swerve? You get a new one every single week. It's like, that's not going to draw a million viewers, blah, 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 blah. It's like, do these people, when they're looking up a movie to watch, do they go, The Godfather, Marlon Brando, 100% on, wow, this looks really cool. It didn't draw as much as Avatar. I don't think I can watch that. Like, this represents the core, the beating heart of niche wrestling and niche wrestling rules, because Timothy Thatcher's quote attached to that Walter quote was, look, I like punk rock. So if I go to a show and I play punk rock, people show up, buy a ticket, that's great. But if they don't, I'm happy because I'm doing my thing, I'm being me. I love Timothy Thatcher for that. Wrestling needs more real motherfuckers like Timothy Thatcher.
Yes.
Because niches are the lifeblood of this business. Niches are what make it interesting. The most boring art in the world is created for mass consumption. Who says their favorite band is Imagine Dragons? Whose favorite restaurant is Pizza Hut? Right? Niches are the lifeblood of this business. Those quotes to me are absolutely beautiful and speak to two very evocative wrestling philosophies. Tim Thatcher is the man. They kick the crap out of each other. I realize I've barely spoken about the match, but you should check it out. It's
Chopped him in the fucking head!
dirty, brutal, concussive war. The likes of which you will never see on a mainstream wrestling product because it's the most beautiful niche of all time. Celebrate niches. Avatar sucks, Imagine Dragons sucks, Pizza Hut sucks. You.
It's chopped in the head.
So best UK wrestling matches, I mean, it depends on what the provisos are. But once again, I'll go for one that nobody's going to be talking about on these videos, and one that I was at. And it's when WCPW had become Defiant. I believe they were running Manchester. I think it was one of the Academy buildings, or no, it was the Ritz, whatever it's called. And it was Walter, or Gunter as he would have been, other way around, sorry. It was Walter, let me get confused, taking on Will Osprey. Now, I remember this for lots of reasons. One, I just started wrestling myself and I injured my shoulder. And that was the show I had to go out there and go, I already had 5 matches and I'll be off for 6 months, sorry about that, so it was a bad day. 2, my girlfriend was in the crowd and she knew nothing about wrestling before she met me, so she was about to see Walter versus Will Osprey. And 3, the match itself was just incredible. Like, it's no surprise they've gone on to do what they have been doing. Now, again, even then watching, like, everyone knew that Walter could have been signed tomorrow, should he have wanted, but he wanted to stay in Europe at that time. And Will Osprey was on the ascendancy. And really, you were kind of watching 2 guys that were rewriting the current generation of rules, because you did have Walter, who was quite old school. I'm not going to do that much, but everything I do is going to mean everything. Whereas Will Osprey was just making a brand new way to be a professional wrestler. And I suppose that's the one shame of them not being in the same company on a huge scale, like they are now in WWE and AEW. Because I think, well, one day I hope to have that match on pay-per-view again on a mainstream American product. And it's just going to blow your mind. It is David versus Goliath, and even better now than they were then. But it was so brutal, but not in a way, it wasn't like chair shots or or thumbtacks or anything like that. It was just Walter like hurling Will Ospreay into the crowd. And some of the moves that they did, sort of, and some of the chops as well, was crazy.
Punishment will continue, and it looks like
I remember it happened to my girlfriend after the fact, which I think is the ultimate praise. She was like, well, I know wrestling is predetermined, but that was like a little bit more real, right? It was like, bam, you got her. Which is, I don't know if you can still see it. It must be out there somewhere. But it's just, again, big man, small man, done incredibly well, but also for an independent stage. Like, they knew what the fans wanted, and they tapped into all of that. And it's so easy to get lost in it. It's so easy to enjoy. And I don't actually remember who won. I presume it was Will Ospreay, but I don't know. But I do remember on that night when I was viewing it, I have no idea which direction this is going to go in. I didn't know the card. I didn't know who was going to do what. But I do remember being just pulled in by it. And yet knowing that, again, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years down the line, there was no way, depending on what their goals and dreams were, that they weren't going to make it. So I'll put that in there, but again, there's so many that I'll be forgetting now. I've been very privileged to see some incredible UK matches, but you know, given that one is the world champion in WWE and Will definitely be AEW world champion eventually, and of course just recently the international champion, I'll make sure I put them over, brother, to use the stupid phrases. I regret saying that. I'm an awful, terrible person. But yeah, if you can check it out, you should. And if you like those two wrestlers and you've never seen it, it'll be the best day you've had in a while. And if you do it while eating a pizza, it's going to be even better.
If it's not Bulldog versus Brett, which has got to be in that conversation, I'm going to go with MJF versus Adam Cole. Now, I know it was very divisive as a main event. In fact, it was reflective of the wider feud. It was always going to be polarizing, controversial. A lot of people thought that it was a little bit too lightweight for such a show of such magnitude as All in London, or the first one at least. But I think on its own specific terms, it's very much a masterpiece. And I think what they went for was incredibly ambitious and unbelievably intelligent. I will forget to say this, so I'm going to say this bit first. I know people who very much dislike either Adam Cole as a wrestler or this kind of style of match, heavy on melodrama, that were just swept up in the experience of watching it live. More than one person who I know probably wouldn't have enjoyed it as much on television, who went there live and just was overwhelmed by how good it was. One of the reasons why I thought this was so intelligent and successful is that at the time, it's been disputed since, and we'll probably never know for sure. At the time, it felt like, well, this is literally the biggest crowd ever. This is the most amount of fans who have ever gone into a building to watch a professional wrestling show and a professional wrestling main event. What I thought was so inspired and clever about this match is that they thought, right, we've got the biggest possible volume ever to work with, the most people making the most noise. I mean, that kind of makes sense. We've got the most people ever. How do we make the most people in a building for wrestling ever make every single noise loudly? So you have this match and it unfolds where, you know, deep in the drama, as with most modern back and forth main events, you've got these incredible near falls, this incredible amount of drama, and then they've also teased the idea of one of the wrestlers might turn on the other, so there's this hum of suspense throughout. You've got these incredibly violent spots. There was like, what, a brain buster on some steel stairs or whatever, table spots, you know, head drops. So you've got those oohs and ahs, like very, very loud. You've always got this is awesome chants because every sort of match gets them, particularly this one, which was awesome. You get the sort of the false finish where they do the double clothesline, which they've built towards very well. And I think you had that penny drop, that epiphany of, that's why you kept doing double clothesline. And then it was like that, realization pop. Like this match was so clever that you've got like different names for new pops, like the realization pop. And not only do you get people exploding with excitement, sort of like bristling, like ooh, with like the violent action. It was very funny throughout as well. And the spot where Adam Cole accidentally gives Bryce Remsburg a Panama Sunrise. Like, people howled and pissed themselves laughing. So you got laughter, cheering, near falls, gasps, suspense. They made you make every single noise with how tonally all over the place in the best possible way this match was. Genuinely, in terms of crowd psychology, one of the most impressive matches I've ever seen in any country ever.
It's Bret Hart, it's Davey Boy Smith, it's SummerSlam 92, and it may well be the match that I've watched the most times in my entire life, literally. literally hundreds of times, and I've still got the SummerSlam 92 VHS tape somewhere in a box in an attic. It's still around. It's still around. This is one of the greatest matches to ever take place on UK soil. One of the greatest babyface versus babyface matches of all time. One of the greatest Intercontinental Championship matches of all time, and one of the best matches, quite frankly, in WWE history. Adding to all of this, there was a drama of the Hart family, with some family members supporting Davey Boy, picking Davey for the win. Others supported Bret, thinking Bret was going to retain the Intercontinental title. And then there was poor Diana Hart stuck in the middle between her husband Davey and her brother Bret. It was just all great. And given the revelation that the British Bulldog had been smoking crack in the weeks leading up to the match, and that Davey forgot the match layout just minutes into the match, one could rightly argue that this is the finest work of Bret Hart's career. Bret possibly had a handful of matches better than this, but this was a hitman who had to take Davey Boy by the hand and walk him through the match, resulting in an all-time classic. They saw the Bulldog counter a sunset flip to get the 1-2-3 in front of 80,000 people, and it was glorious. It is so replayable, rewatchable. Just one of the greatest matches in WWE history, and of course one of the greatest to take place here in the UK.